I think he is smart enough, like, it would not surprise me.
Put it down. I got water anyway. There you go. Watch them drop pretty damn. It's pretty fast. We need more.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm leaving. I'm the first speaker.
Oh, you Sean. I can. Do you have to? Or
I emailed it to Jesus.
what's the name of the receipt too?
Weaver income tax.
Yeah.
So when you did it, did they withdraw?
Is Susan the dealer over there?
Oh, you were talking about the other one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What's your
Taking up another closet, right? I'm gonna have to.
But like. I was just
It really says things.
Turn this thing on, or just,
Yeah. Right.
My mind, like, hear people. I was trying to decide.
testing 1, 2, 3.
I can adjust the volume.
She said that she does need some.
Just one thing.
I'm looking at the weather,
Thank you.
and that's why. Well, my sister will come back. My is not so much.
Hey, Shana, how
Hey, good. How are
Nice
you?
seeing you.
Good to see you. How are you?
how's it going here? Perfect.
How's
Me,
your retirement?
I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. I'm working, but I'm enjoying it too. Yes, I'm working. But I'm working for HCDE as a consultant in one of the school districts. But I tell them I don't have the responsibility. Whenever I can, I can go today. And that's it. So I'm enjoying it. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. So hopefully that it continues like that. Yeah, a little work here and there. Should be okay. Just so we can do something and not get bored.
Yeah.
Great, great. Nice seeing you. Bye-bye.
Take the day off and lay on.
Yeah.
I don't think it would work for me there. That way.
Are you going to speak?
I was sitting in your office one day, I'm looking down on her pants, I don't know why. Yeah, it was lemons, so I was like, I'm just really. No, I said, it was, she's like, what's your name? Because I was like, I mean, I knew she was.
I'll let you take your copy.
excited to hear tax stuff so early in the year, right? There's a few wrinkles, I'm sorry, thank you, in the tax code that, we felt like we needed to kind of get familiar with. Because there'll be a lot of people that are going to be asking, well, why do I do this, why do I fit in that, and, so we asked Lynn to come in and help us, and has also some exciting news to share with everybody at the end of the session, but we really appreciate his time. He was here a couple of times before. Yes. And at the end of the session, we're going to kind of, have a little break so in case, the code, you still have a question, you want to ask him something afterwards also, or during the session as well. But we also set up a little kind of a briefing with our communications department, where he's going to do sort of a Q&A with them and take it, and then we'll make it available in case you want to have it available for staff, so you can kind of see what things that you hear here in the session, maybe people in the board, and do that for ourselves. So we also have our video streaming it, so we'll also give you the link, so in case you want to go back and watch it again, you can always do that. We have a couple other speakers who will have some breaks in between. If we get too close to 11:30, I'll get hungry too, so we'll start the session early enough, because I'm already getting hungry with back there. So our next session, just so that's why I put it on your calendar, will be on Valentine's Day, February 14th. We'll have something special for that day, some cake or something that's a little nicer pastry. So, all right, well, so welcome, and please help me welcome Leland Duskins, CPA with Weaver, and Senior Manager, and so he's going to come and tell us everything about taxes, so please help me welcome Leland.
Can y'all hear me all right? Good. First off, it's my turn to have the allergies and sore throat and a hacking cough, so I apologize ahead of time if I get one of those coughing spells and I'm into this microphone. The important news that I have is that after 11 years with Hartford Electric Program, which is now Weaver, I, in 2 weeks, will be leaving the firm and starting my own practice, partly as a little road to retirement down the road, but just looking at ways to slow down a little bit. So if you have questions for the next 2 weeks, my direct line will work. After that, my cell number will be my way of contacting you. And don't hesitate to do so for any questions that you have. Income tax Friday, early January, Friday morning, rainy day. That's just what y'all all want to hear. I appreciate you being here. Look, everybody looks like they're still awake. It's a wide variety of areas, and in my PowerPoint, I have most of the same information. The last 2/3 of it's most of the same information I did last year, updated in a few places, so that if you weren't here last year, still trying to figure out all the changes from the 2017 Tax Act. There's a lot of information in there. But what I want to cover first today is, he just asked me to look at the W-4. It's been redesigned. If you haven't seen it, I've got handouts here in a moment for you. And while we were all Christmas shopping, Congress passed a new tax law. The last week that they were in session, around the 17th of December. They also had some tax act in the summer. And so I'm going to spend some time on that. Please do not hesitate to raise your hand with a question as we go through. I'm always tempted to say, are there areas that you want me to cover to make sure that I do cover? It's almost like starting with a Q&A before I get into my presentation. So if somebody wants to, if there's some particular area to make sure I cover, please let me know. If not, I'll get started with what I've got. Maybe. So I've got some 2020 updates, 2019 tax laws, then we go back into the old tax law for some updates. So in 2020, there's going to be a new form, I quote new because it's really an old form coming back. And if you remember the 1099 NEC, it's coming back for next filing, next January, and it's for non-employee compensation. As you know, now we're issuing 1099s miscellaneous, and those forms have the non-employee compensation, and that's due on January 31st to the independent contractor, and it's due to the IRS on January 31st. That was a change a few years ago from February 28th. There's other items on that form, that in 1099 miscellaneous, that don't have to be submitted to the IRS till February 28th. So to clear up that, they're going back to the NEC form for non-employee compensation. This will be for payments of $600 or more in non-employee compensation, independent contractors, attorneys, golden parachute payments, also non-qualified deferred compensation deferrals that do not meet code section 409A. So this will be some different reporting next year. Again, not this month, but a year from now. Director's fees also will go on there. IRS, as they usually do every year, revised publications 15 and 15A, and now there's 15T. If you're familiar with it, it addresses the redesign of the W-4. It no longer includes the percentage method and wage bracket method of withholding tables. Publication 15A is the supplemental tax information. And then the 15T is new, and it contains the percentage method and wage bracket method, and it allows computation of withholding based on the prior year W-4 or the redesigned W-4. How many of you worked with the new W-4? It's now about a 4-page form plus the IRS.gov website to make it happen. Why do we have a new W-4? What changed in the tax law that causes this to happen? I'm sorry? Tax rates? No allowances. There's no personal exemptions for the next few years. We have a standard deduction, but we don't have personal exemption. And that's how people say, well, I've got so many exemptions, and that's how they put their code. We don't have that anymore. So the Tax Act eliminated the personal exemptions, and so we had over and under withheld. For those of you, and I believe I recall many of you do file tax returns, prepare tax returns, there were a lot of surprises. People got back less, in many cases, people got back less money than they're used to getting. Congressman Brady assured me that everybody was going to get back the same amount. And I told them later, no, that wasn't the case. Because they expected people to go in and adjust their withholding. And people don't do that. Right? They just let things roll. So they were surprised. Now, I don't know how many people came last February, March, April, and said, I want to adjust my withholding. I'm guessing many didn't, and they're adjusting to it. So the new W-4 has a 5-step process. The easy part is you put your basic information on the form, and then you have to determine whether you have more than one job, or if your spouse has a job. And then if you've got dependents, are you getting the child tax credit? Because that is a significant savings of tax for people with children under the age of 17. And then if they've got other deductions in excess of the standard deduction, and then they sign and submit the form. So step 2 is the critical step, and there's 3 different ways to get the most accurate and still maintain privacy. The taxpayer, your employee, needs to go to irs.gov/W4APP. Anybody done that yet? It's like filling out your tax return. All right, so you go in, you put your estimated income, your deductions, and it comes back and gives you some information to put on this form. Can you see all of your employees doing that? No. 2B option is roughly accurate withholding. We retain some privacy, and it uses the multiple jobs worksheet that's in there to help figure it out. And then if they only have 2 jobs under 2C, they may check the box for 2C, and they just cut everything in half. That's accurate if both people work and have similar income, which is not generally the case. Now, my guess is that most people are not going to change their withholding, and they'll just see whatever their surprise is every April, March, February, whenever they file the return. The new form, though, is required for all new hires after December 31st of 2019. If you don't have it, you're supposed to treat them as single with no adjustments. So this is a form we're going to have to deal with. Those paid prior to 2020, if they wish to adjust their withholding, they must use a new W-4. And there'll be an adjustment for non-resident aliens. If you're exempt from withholding, if you meet both of the following, you pay no federal tax liability in 19, and you expect no liability in 20, you can still claim and ask that no tax be withheld. So that's the W-4 briefly. If you're an HR and payroll, I suggest spending some time on that IRS website, seeing how, working through some of these forms, even if you're just doing it to see how you land to be able to answer questions. I think it's going to be a nightmare, and people are going to look for the shortcut and figure out what the shortcut is and go back around. There's tables in that 15T that take that information, and most of that's probably downloaded into your payroll software and just automatically calculates. So there were several tax laws passed last year. One, and somebody's paid to come up with names for laws. So we have the Secure Act, which is setting every community up for Retirement Enhanced Act. And this one deals with our retirement laws. Then we have the Taxpayer Certainty and Disaster Relief Act of 2019, which includes extender legislation. This is a good one because it allows you to go back and amend some 2018 returns. Disaster relief, repeal some of the ACA taxes, and IRS taxpayer service provisions. And then we have the Taxpayer First Act of 2019. Now that's a great title. Let's wait and see if the taxpayer comes first. So the Secure Act expands the opportunities for individuals to increase their savings. This is, how can we get more in retirement plans? It makes some administrative simplifications to the retirement system and modifies requirements for multiple employer plans to make it easier for small businesses to offer such plans. It allows consolidated filings of Form 5500 for similar plans, increase the credit limitation for small plans, startup costs. If you've got a small business and you start a retirement plan, there's some administrative costs that you can get a tax credit for, so increase that. Small employer automatic enrollment credit, which is new. Non-tuition fellowship and stipend payments are not considered compensation. I'm going to go into some of these areas a little bit more. There's now for births or adoptions, you can have a penalty-free withdrawal from your retirement plan. Distributions after December 31st, 2019. There's a lot of dates about when things become effective in these different acts. So this allows penalty-free withdrawals from retirement plans for a qualified birth or adoption made during the 1-year period beginning on the date on which a child or individuals born on which the legal adoption is finalized. The maximum allowed distribution is $5,000 per spouse, so a couple can take $10,000 out of retirement to help cover those costs. Repeal of the maximum age for traditional IRA contributions. Under the prior law, once you reach 70 and a half, you cannot contribute to an IRA. But there are people working beyond 70 and a half, and they'd like to be able to make contributions to their IRA. And so beginning after December 31st, 2019, that prohibition is repealed, and people can contribute to an IRA, even though they've reached 70 and a half. Does anybody remember what the age 70 and a half meant regarding IRAs?
You have to take money out.
You have to take money out. Change. 70 and a half is now 72. All right, so not a big change, but again, recognizing that people are working longer. So that's an increase in the age. The new law required beginning date for, which is an RDD for IRAs is April 1st following the calendar year, which the IRA retains to age 72. For a non-5% company owner, the RDD is April 1st following the later the calendar year in which the employee attains age 72 or dies. If the 5% owner, the RDD is the same as for IRAs, even if the employer continue to work. So if you're a 5% owner, you of like an S corporation or a C corporation, you still have to start taking it if you're still working. I think it's going to die for the non-5% owner. You can continue paying in, and you don't have to take it. You don't have to take it out. Distributions required to be made after December 31st, 2019 respect individuals who attain age 70 and a half after the date. Not sure. I threw this together pretty quickly with new law, so I apologize if I've got some things I'm not clear of. This is a biggie. If you heard of stretch IRAs, when somebody inherits an IRA, like my mother-in-law passed away a few months ago, my wife and her siblings inherited an IRA. Before they could distribute that IRA to them, they had to take a distribution, and they have to take distributions over the remaining time of their life. The big change here is you can't stretch it over their life. So instead of stretching it over 30 or 40 years, it's now going to be stretched over 10 years. So the remaining, for people that die after December 31st, 2019, the remaining account balance must be distributed to the designated beneficiaries within 10 years after the date of death. Now what we're seeing, it doesn't have to be 10 equal installments. It can all be in year 10. It could be in years 3, 4, 5. But it all has to come out within 10 years. That's a big difference. Now, I've got clients with several $1 million in IRAs. When they pass away, all that money comes out to their kids within 10 years. Where in the old, that can come out over their lifetime and then go on to their kids. And so that money never gets taxed. So this gets this money being taxed right away. So that's also how they're paying for some of these other things, creating some tax to make this thing revenue neutral. But it's been an issue that Congress has been concerned about money never being taxed for a long time. And so they're getting around this. At one time, they were looking at a 5-year stretch, and it ended up being 10 years. So I guess that's better. But it's going to be a significant difference in planning. I can see if somebody's in that time frame where they've retired at 66, they don't have to take things out of their IRA till 72, their income may be lower those few years. And so if they inherit something, it might be worth taking it out in those years because they have to take it out of their own IRA. So you may not wait the whole 10 years. The alternative is you don't know how long you're going to live. So if you wait to the 10th year, it's earning tax-free, and then it goes on to your benefit. So there's going to be some interesting planning opportunities with this. There are some exceptions. A surviving spouse doesn't have to take it out over 10 years. It goes out over their remaining lifetime. The child of an IRA owner has not reached majority. So again, if somebody's under the age of 18 and they inherit an IRA, they don't have to take it out over 10 years. But they have to take it out once they reach majority age. And again, if you've got a big IRA, and you've got an 18-year-old getting hold of a bunch of money, not always the best picture. So there may be some trust planning if you've got a sizable IRA. A chronically ill individual is defined in the code, doesn't have to do that. And any other individual who is not more than 10 years younger than the IRA owner. So if I leave it to somebody, if I'm not married and I leave it to a girlfriend who's who's within 10 years of my age, she doesn't have to take it out over, she can take it out over her lifetime instead of 10 years old. And this applies to 414D government plans after December 31st, 2021. So that's a big change for inherited IRAs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. It's portability of lifetime income options. There's some new choices for a lifetime income investment. What they're trying to do is make annuities possible to be able to be transferred from when you, there's some investments that you make that are hard to transfer when you leave one company to another. So this relates to annuities. Again, it also goes into 403B plans. And I think I've got a typo in there, I apologize, for the 47. I don't know if any of you are familiar with lifetime income investments, but if you are, you can refer back to this. Treatment of custodial accounts on termination of the plan allows upon termination maybe an individual custodial account in kind or participant. Again, so we don't have to sell off assets and stay on a deferred tax basis. This one's retroactive to 2008 or 2009. So something's been hung up there for a while. Long-term part-time workers who participate in 401ks. A lot of times you've got plans that are looking at to work at least 1,000 hours or some amount of hours to eliminate part-time workers. So this allows for plan years beginning after 2020, the people that work 500 hours instead of 1,000 for 3 years can now qualify for 401k. It doesn't require you to make that change in the plan, but it allows for that opportunity. There's benefits for, so sometimes they get a tax act that they can pass something that really have nothing to do with the main goal of that. So the volunteer firefighters and emergency medical responders lobbying work on this one, I'm sure. And reinstates for 2020, just 1 year. Up to $50 per month exclusion from income of qualified state or local tax benefits, or the qualified reimbursement. So there's some places where the volunteer firefighters can get some type of tax credit, and so that's not included in income. And they again made some changes to 529 plans. Again, that have a whole lot to do with retirement. but this allows for distributions for registered apprenticeships, certain programs. So I know it used to be mainly colleges, and now they've added private schools for elementary through high school. Now they've added apprenticeships. Up to $10,000 of qualified student loan repayment can come out of a 529 to repay student loan. That's a lifetime limit of just $10,000. And if you're using your 529 to pay that interest on that loan, you don't get the student loan interest deduction on that. They increase the failure to file penalties, increase penalties for failure to file retirement plan returns, fix some excise tax stuff. Here's another one that kept thrown in here, the kiddie tax. This is the Gold Star Family Fix. Used to be under the kiddie tax that some parents, and this was really big when interest rates were really high. Some of you look young enough not to remember when interest rates were 18%, 15%. Yeah, you could really earn some money on your CDs as opposed to 0.5% or 1%, 2%. And so people would put money in their kids' names and say, okay, the kid doesn't have to pay tax. Congress said, no. If your child has unearned income of a certain amount, they've got to calculate it at your tax bracket. Then when they did the 2017 Act, they said, let's make it simpler. Because you have to calculate the kids, and you have to calculate the parents, and you have to throw it into the kids. Let's just do it at the estate and trust tax rate, which are high rates. Well, then you had some Gold Star families, military families, who were getting income that all of a sudden threw them into these high tax rates. They were getting disability type income, and it was throwing this income in, and they were raised their voices, and Congress heard them and said, okay, we're going back to the old rules on this one. Extender legislation. Anybody know what extenders are? There's a whole bunch of, it used to be about 50-something, and now it's down to about 30. These are things that would go into law for a year or two, be extended each year, never made it into the code to be permanent. And just like I said, every year Congress would come in and extend. They might extend for a year or two. They'd skip a year, they'd go back and make it retroactive. This did not make, many of these things did not make the changes in 2017, so they just sort of sit out there. Many of them have nothing to do with anything that we deal with, and they are set for certain industries, and so some members of Congress say we don't need to be subsidizing those industries, even though we subsidize other industries. So in the last December 17th or so, they passed these particular extenders. I'll give you an example, the American Opportunity Credit, the $2,500 to $2,500 college credit that you can get, that was under the extender law for many years, till it's made permanent. If you're familiar with qualified charitable distributions from retirement plans, when somebody reaches now age 72, they can have the money go straight to charity. That was one of these extender things that's now permanent. Well, one of these that now passed is mortgage insurance premiums being itemized deductions for 2018 to 2020. So you go back and amend the 2018 return if you're itemizing and you pay, when you have to take out a mortgage, if you don't put a certain amount down, you have to pay mortgage insurance premiums. And so for a number of years, Congress said you could deduct that like interest. But now you go back and amend your return. Problem is, under the new law, a lot of people aren't itemizing, as you probably noticed. Unreimbursed medical expenses have been 7.5% for a number of years. Congress has tried to raise that to 10% of AGI. They get a little pushback from probably ARP and other places. And so they went back and said 7.5% through 2020. I believe that was all right for 18 and 19. Deduction for qualified tuition and related expenses. So if you had used up your 4 years of the American Opportunity Credit, you could then deduct, say, graduate school costs up to $4,000. And this is not an itemized, it's, you know, given to AGI. That disappeared for a couple of years, and now it's back through 2020. Non-business energy property credit. That disappeared, now it's back for a little bit. The problem with this one is, one, it has a $500 lifetime credit, or lifetime cap. But this covered, you know, things like so energy efficient air conditioners, water heaters, heat pumps, and so forth for your personal residence. So again, it's always fun when things go away, come back, go away, come back. Then there were a whole bunch of other, those are some of the key ones, but just, I threw some things out here. There's an employer tax credit for family medical leave, work opportunity credit, certain rules related to beer, wine, and distilled spirits, and excise taxes reduced. I'm on a mailing list for one of these craft distilleries. We have to see us saying, talk to your congressman. We may have to go out of business because the excise tax is going up on January 1st. I didn't talk to my congressman. Enough people did, and they had a little relief for another year. That craft industry is very big. Exclusion from, I hope nobody has to deal with this, but back when this really came about, 2008-9, with all the bankruptcies and mortgages. But we had all the problems back then that if you and exclusion of income and discharge and indebtedness income from a qualified principal residence debt. Hopefully we're not seeing too much of that now. But you know, if anybody got the 1099 COD, you work out a deal with a credit card, or you're doing cash for somebody, worked out a deal with a credit card company, and they paid off the balance for less than what it was. And then all of a sudden, January, they get this 1099 COD for $5,000. They got to pay tax on that income that was written off. Well, the same thing would happen on a mortgage. You got income because you got some benefit of that money being written off. And Congress said, wait a minute, if it's due to your personal residence, you don't have to pay tax on that. There's a few other things in here, again, that hit certain areas: railroad track maintenance credit, a 7-year recovery for motorsports entertainment. Complexes seem to write it off over a long period of time, 7 years. Certain racehorses can be written off over 3 years. So again, there's certain industries that get their special coverage. Something to help the Indian reservations out. The film, TV, and theater, quick write-offs. The biodiesel credits. Fuel cell, again, this is trying to help the alternative cars, alternative energy areas. The manufacture of energy efficient homes. There's some others that go into this. Again, things we don't see, but it's just, there's different industries that have their hands on what can happen. Disaster relief. Unfortunately, we see this too often. For our area, Imelda, Tropical Storm Imelda. We actually, if you have not filed a tax return for 2018, and you're in Harris County, Montgomery County, Liberty County, then Chambers County, over to Beaumont, you actually have till January 31st to file your return. It'd still be a time to file a return if you extended it back in April. When we have these disasters, they often extend the time for filing returns. I've got a few clients still hanging out there. And a lot of times, when they have this, And they didn't pass any of this legislation for all these disasters that happened in 2019. So if you had to take money out of your retirement account, under these disaster rules, you don't have to pay that 10% penalty, not to exceed $100,000. If you are an employer, you pay your employees through that disaster, there's a credit that you can get, and a few other rules. The qualified disaster-related personal casualty losses, they have to not exceed 10% of AGI. If you have casualty loss, it has to exceed 10% of AGI. For a disaster, a federally declared disaster, that doesn't come into play. And some other special rules. Parking lot tax. Anybody ever hear about the parking lot tax? One of the things in the 2017 Act was that certain fringe benefits, so if you're getting paid parking, like our Houston office, we're in an office building, and they have to pay parking for all of the staff, and so the staff doesn't pay for parking. But that fringe benefit is being changed and not being deductible. When it got to nonprofits, all of a sudden that became a tax. If they were paying, it became unrelated business income. And there was a big uproar. I talked to Congressman Brady about it. He said, yeah, we're just trying to equalize the playing field. And a few months later, he said, we need to get rid of that. They weren't sure how they were going to. Somehow or another, that's one change that had to come out of this. There's a lot of technical corrections that need to happen in the 2017 Act. This is one that actually snuck in. And so there were a lot of nonprofits. I was doing some returns for our Dallas office. They've got parking issues. They're down. If you have a nonprofit in a downtown location, you got paid parking. If you're paying it for your employees, again, it became a tax. So I had some nonprofits paying $10,000, $20,000 in tax on their parking. They'll be able to go back and get refunds on that. The Disaster Act also modified the excise tax on private foundations. You know, anything with private foundations, they've got a tax on some of their unearned income. And this just simplified that calculation. And some other things that happened in this disaster relief that doesn't have anything to do with disaster relief, that just happened for some of these changes. They repealed some ACA tax, ACA, Affordable Care Act. There was a medical device tax. That, you know, we all end up paying that tax whenever we buy these devices, or our insurance company pays them. But they repealed that for sales after December 31st, 2019. There was a health insurance provider fee. That's repealed at the beginning of next year. And the Cadillac plan. I don't know if you're familiar with Cadillac plans, but these were big health insurance plans that provide big benefits. And there's going to be a tax on those. They kept pushing that, delaying that. They finally decided we're not going to do that. But there's a lot of ACA stuff that's gone away. The big one that went away in the 2017 Act for 2019 was the requirement to have to pay a penalty if you didn't have health insurance. So when you're doing 2019 returns, you don't have to calculate that penalty anymore if somebody didn't have health insurance. You still have the issues if somebody had a subsidy, that they may get more subsidy back or have to repay some of that subsidy if they were on the exchange getting health insurance. So you still have those calculations, but the penalty is gone. IRS taxpayer service provisions. We made a whole lot of changes to the IRS. In the past over the summer, changes in the management and oversight of the IRS. And again, just a whole bunch of trying to make the IRS more efficient in Congress's view. They'd be a lot more efficient, I'm getting political here, so excuse me, if they went back to funding them at a level that they could do what they need to do. They're trying to fund the IRS at 2008 funding levels. I think it's 2008. The IRS has grown, there's more tax law to deal with. The audit rates are like 0.2, 0.3%. And so people aren't being audited. They feel like they're not going to be audited. What do they need to do on their tax returns? So, there are changes. And I'm getting close on my time. So I've talked about all these things here. In this new act. Exempt organizations, if you do anything with exempt organizations, they're now, not for 19, but they're going to be having e-filing of the 990 EC returns. The 1023 is going to become electronically filed return. Eventually the 990T for unrelated business income is going to be e-filing. So the IRS is required to notify organizations if they haven't filed in 2 years. They've got to send out a notice reminding them that they'll be revoked as a nonprofit if they don't file that 3rd year. New mileage rates for business travel in your auto, it went down 0.5 cent. Medical went down 3 cents. Charity, there's no change. Charity is in the code, it can't change it, it's Congress does. Reminder, auto allowances W-2 income, and reminder that employee business expenses are not an itemized deduction. Business meals continue to be deductible. And parking, we talked about a little bit. Boy, and achievement, this is a slide from last time. Qualified business income deduction. Now, if you got to work with this, this was fun last year. There's actually a form for it this year. That's where pass-through income or sole proprietors don't pay tax, in some cases on 20% of their income. I'm going to pause here for a minute, just watching time. If there are specific areas that somebody has a question on, either what I've covered or on all the surprises that you had in your time filling out returns last year, yes?
Has anything on capital gains changed?
Nothing on capital gains has changed. I don't think anything's changed. Now, one of my rules, never say never, never say always. There was discussion by the administration about indexing capital gains to inflation, thinking that they could do that by executive order. That was looked at by one of the Bush administration. They cannot do that. I'm doing some other reading, and it seems like they probably cannot, but maybe they're going to try. What they're saying, if you buy a piece of land, hold it for 20 years, some of the gain is just due to inflation. That's going to be fun calculations if they ever come up with something. And inflation is different parts of the area, and how much gain is due to inflation versus just the market.
Yeah.
But that would be a way to reduce capital gains. But that has not happened yet. The president said he's deferring on that until 2021 or 2022. So we'll see what happens on that. But you still have the Affordable Care Tax, the 3.8% net investment income of your capital gains on earned income get above 200,000 or 250,000, single there. But otherwise, generally the same thing. On a state, you're still going to step up in basis. That's it, great. Yes. The only changes would be things I referred to in the Secure Act. I believe, and I'm not telling, I don't deal as much with the 403B, I know y'all do. I don't. I know you have advisors, probably, that should be updating you on any significant changes on those. Question about?
Can you explain more about the head household and the single when you're using it for employees?
The head of household is considered single, is that? I'm gonna tell you, I didn't look at that.
It's crazy to me that it's a huge change for us. Because when they're putting this form in, and, I don't know, it's.
So I apologize, I didn't look at that close because I'm not dealing with completing it. So there's not a separate head of household category from single.
Well, it's it's always about the age. It's either the age standard or the married. It's not single, married, filing at a single rate anymore, it's just different.
Trying to simplify everything. Other questions? Yes?
I see it just when you had one of the slides, you was talking about the offering compromises.
I think, if I recall, the offering compromise, they're trying to get, make it easier for lower income, to work with lower income offering compromise situations. Although, the problem is there's no staff to talk to work anything out. I think they're also waiving some of the fees, that's what it was. There's fees, having to pay that first payment, and setup fees, I think those are being waived for low income offering compromises. So I'm just trying to rush through, I'm just going to show you. New tax brackets, so every tax brackets are tied to inflation. So 2018 on the right, 2019, so you'll see that slight changes when you hit the next bracket because of inflation. New tax forms. How'd you like those forms last year? I had fun showing clients, here's your postcard, you can mail it. Name and address on one side, income on the back, your bank account on the back. You really want to put that in the mail? I haven't had that conversation with Congressman Brady. So now they've gone back and we've got income on the front page. I printed some of these out, I'll leave them. But we now have more information on the front page and on the back. So it's not a postcard anymore. I guess it's an oversized postcard. And we do have 3 other schedules to pick up that other information. Instead of, what was it, 6? So they have simplified it some. The other thing they came up with, let's see if I can find it. Whoops, hit the wrong one. There's that kind of schedule 1. Again, the changes for moving expenses last year, the healthcare responsibility penalty that exists. Child tax credits, that was a biggie. Here's a new form.
I put earlier, now we can connect.
1040 SR.
Yeah, it's working. All right, thank you.
What the SR stands for? Seniors. The main thing I can tell is it's bigger print. And I don't know how many are actually printing this by hand, which is about the only time it would come into play. I guess it's easier to read. So we have a 1040, 10 SR, U.S. tax return for seniors. It looks more like the old form, but with that, are there any more questions? I know pushing the 10 o'clock. I'll hang around for any personal questions that you have. I'll leave these tax form samples here. There's 3 different stacks to get the front page if you want to look at them. If not, they will be recycling. Any other questions? I appreciate your questions and your listening, and if you want me back next year, let me know.
Let's take a 10-minute break and I'll go
For different school districts, That's the biggest Oh, yeah, Robert's all over the place, yeah. Which is good and bad, because we're not teaching, like, already, they get to choose whether they want to do it. But I think we
Hello? All right, we're gonna continue with our presentations and, staying with the topic of taxes and also bond updates, there are gonna be probably some a little bit overlapping in some bond updates that deal also with taxes. So Juan has been here, and I was looking for you, for your son Humberto. I guess he didn't make it this morning.
Somebody has to work.
Yeah. So, they're out of San Antonio. It's Camilla and Ponic. You also have a Houston office, and they've been here before, and they have some updates on bond issues. So please help me welcome Juan Aguilera.
Thank you very much. Does this thing work here? Good. I wanted to make sure that I had it in mute a little while ago because I didn't want to be like Elizabeth Warren and so I have to make sure as soon as you tell me to mute the mic whenever we're talking over here. Thank you very much, Mr. Mesqua, Dr. Mesqua. As Jesus mentioned, we were here last year. Humberto and I were here last year. Humberto is my son, and I tell everybody there's no nepotism in our office, but I did bring my son in, very, very qualified, no longer young attorney. He's already been with us for 12 years, but he helps and with our work that we do in public finance. And we're here by I guess Jesus mentioned we were here last year. We're here by popular demand again this year. As I understand, last year this topic is so exciting that it just is going to make everybody want to jump up and down. Hopefully, so we'll try to make it as palatable as possible. Today I'm going to talk about three things, three areas, and that would be we're going to talk about bond election legislative updates. And when we spoke to Mr. Mesqua, he mentioned, give us some updates that have happened since the last legislative session last year, 2019. Then I'm also going to go in and talk, as I did last year, talk about the options that are available for school districts to finance either buildings, construction projects, renovations, buying of equipment, those kind of things. And then lastly, I'll talk about compliances with the federal securities laws. And that, as we mentioned before, and it's still continuing to be a very, very important area of the law. When I first started this work close to 30 years ago, we primarily would want to focus on the financing options and what the law said. And even though the Securities and Exchange Commission was around at that time, it now seems that they're getting more and more active, and we're starting to see more enforceability. And it really scares a lot of people, and a lot of important information that needs to be conveyed to you so that you will be able to then know about these rules. So, I mentioned a little bit, I work with this Camilla and Ponic. Our firm has been around since 1991. In 1992, they started doing public finance. The firm was started by two attorneys, and they were representing a school district in San Antonio. And since then, I look at our law firm as primarily school law firm, if there is such a thing, I don't know, because we primarily work with school districts. Now we do represent other governmental entities, so we are a defense firm, but our emphasis and our start was with school law. I came around in 2000, worked with another law firm, one of those major law firms, and have been doing public finance for a number of years, and came over to this to the Escamilla and Pontic, and I thought it was a good fit because even today, the majority of the public finance work that we do, approximately about 60% of the work that we do is representing school districts. And for me, it's great to work with school districts, but at the same time to have the general law attorneys that have a lot of experience in working with the day-to-day type of things with school districts, a lot of issues, construction law, employment law, special ed law, all those kind of things. It's nice to be able to have somebody on board that we can be able to go out and discuss issues that come up in the public finance arena. We also have a tax lawyer who, John Rice, he teaches tax at Trinity and also works with us full-time. And so bond issuances, as probably most of you know, also include federal tax issues that need to be addressed. I will not address those. If there's any questions on that, I'll be happy to see if I can answer them. But that is, that's an area that's also very important in public finance. And the reason being that your school districts, for the most part, issue tax-exempt bonds. What does that mean? That means that if you buy, or a company buys those bonds, the interest that is earned off of the bonds is tax exempt. And that's great. So that means that if I buy bonds from one of the local school districts, and whatever interest I'm receiving on an annual basis, semi-annual basis, that's tax exempt. That's good for the people that are buying the bonds. It's also good for the school districts or the governmental entities, because what that means is that since the bondholders, the people buying the bonds, are going to be not having to pay taxes on that interest that they're earning, that means that they're willing to accept a lower interest rate than they would if they bought regular, bonds or stock from IBM or Apple or somebody like that. So this is the way the federal government then helps local governmental entities like your school districts, in that way, when you're able to now offer a financing and offer them at a lower interest rate, then that helps the governmental entity. But there's rules that need to be kept in place. For example, the school district cannot go out and issue bonds and then go out and do what is called a private activity. And we started to see a lot of this stuff coming around. Well, if we buy this, we finance this scoreboard. And this scoreboard now, we're going to do some advertising on the scoreboard. Is that something that I can be able to use tax-exempt bonds, or is it something that I have to do taxable bonds? That's where we come in, and our tax attorney comes in and we try to figure out, and there's some rules, which I won't bore you with, but there are some rules that we follow and some tests that we need to follow in order to be able to make a determination as to whether something is taxable or tax exempt. The biggest thing that also was a change recently was that governmental entities could be able to refinance, or what we call refunding bonds, and could be done on a tax-exempt basis. The federal government came back and said, no, from now on, if you're going to do an advance refunding, that means that if you issue bonds and you'll pay off the bonds at a later time, more than 90 days, then those bonds have to be done on a taxable basis as opposed to tax exempt. We still do tax exempt bonds, refunding bonds, but those have to be paid off, or the bonds that you're paying off have to be done within 90 days of the issuance. We're seeing a lot of refundings done on a taxable basis now, because what we're seeing is, and I'm not a financial advisor, is that the tax exempt rate and the taxable rate, it's closer. It's still more expensive to do taxable, but it's still close enough to where if the savings are there, a school district will consider to go ahead and do a refinancing, or refunding as we call it, and do it on a taxable basis. I went way off of my presentation, but here you go. So let's talk about bond election legislative updates. And this is what happened in 2019. I've been doing, as I mentioned to you, this kind of work for about 30 years. And in my 30 years, I've noticed that it's getting more and more difficult, or more and more of a challenge for school districts or any kind of governmental entities to do some type of a financing. School districts, and I'll go later into this, for the most part, when you're doing a capital improvement project or a capital project that includes buildings, you have to go to the voters. Well, it used to be that you could go to the voters anytime. We would call bond elections as long as you went in and had a 45-day, you called the elections and waited 45 days, you could call an election. Then the law was changed and said, no, you can only do it on a uniform election date if it falls in May, the first Saturday in May, or the first Tuesday in November after a Monday, something like that. I don't know how it works in the November. So they made it more challenging, because that was a challenge, because now you can only do it twice a year. But now this legislative session made it even more challenging. So now we have Senate Bill 30, and what that came about is now we're requiring ballot language needs to be able to provide specificity in the bond descriptions. School districts are still the only ones that can be able to use general language, and most of the bonds that we work with, we will do an election, say, bond election, $5 million, $20 million for the construction and equipping of school buildings. And what that would include, it would include obviously your classrooms, it would cover your administration building, it would cover your gymnasium, your stadiums, an auditorium, fine arts, all these things. But then, after this legislative session said, no, can't do that anymore. If there's some specific purpose, you're going to have to go out and have a ballot, and now it's going to have to be included where you're going to have separate propositions included. So no longer can we now say construction and equipment of school buildings and have in there a statement improvements or a new statement. Now it all has to have separate proposition language. So, for example, school buildings, as I mentioned before, school districts still can be able to do, can still use the general category for the construction and equipment of school buildings. However, if you're going to do a stadium that has more than 1,000 spectators, that needs to be a separate proposition by itself. What if you want to do...
What if it's 999?
and as long as we kept it that way, nobody else would come in, and that would be fine.
What is a maximum capacity, 999?
Yeah, and that way we could be able to do it like that. And Jesus and I worked at Laredo ISD. He's the master for being able to get things done. How many lease revenue bonds we did at one time? Like about 8 of them, or not 10 of them at one time. It was just amazing. But anyway, so it's 1,000. So if you're going to do, we have a school district right now. We're going to call a bond election next week. And they want to do a turf replacement. Not the stadium, just the turf. That's going to have to require a separate proposition all by itself. The construction and equipment of an auditorium. Then we have construction acquisition of recreational facilities other than a gymnasium. What that is, and that kind of threw me, but we have a school district that is kind of doing like a multi-purpose type of thing, sort of like an arena, where they will have basketball games. At the same time, they could move the floor out, and they could be able to put up a stage, and then be able to have a presentation, band, concerts, and different kinds of things, meetings, large meetings, and so forth. That unfortunately would have to come in, and the school district has to, is there any way we can fight that so we can just keep it under the general construction and equipment of school buildings? And the Attorney General's office said no. So that would have to be a separate proposition. Also, a performing arts facility, housing for teachers. So we did a couple of those where some small school district where Petula's ISD, there's no housing. So they built they bought an apartment complex that provided that. We did it under the construction equipment of school buildings. Now, you have to mention that as a separate proposition. And here's a big one right here, technology. We see a lot of school districts that would go out and do several $1 million for computers for students and so forth. And now, those are now going to have to be a separate proposition. Unless you're talking about equipment that is technology equipment for security purposes, or that something, infrastructure, something that's integral to the construction of the facility. So that would include like wiring and those kind of things. So that those kind of things, you can still use the general proposition, construction and equipping of school buildings, but if you're just thinking about doing just the computers, then it's going to have to be a separate proposition. So what does that mean? When you go to the ballot, into the election, and you're sitting in the ballot booth or wherever it is, or the computer, and you're voting, you might have to have like 5 or 6 different propositions, each one for the different categories. Now, you know, the pros and cons. This is good because it's allowing people to be able to go out and choose. And so that's always in the law. There is a law that's been around for a long time so that you cannot log roll. It's not really a technical term, but that's what it's called. Things together where you're not allowing the people, the voters, an opportunity to be able to choose one from the other. But the thing is that now we're required to have, if it falls under one of these categories, to have a different proposition. When I first saw this, and we have a legislative group in our firm that works with the legislative bodies and represent school districts and for governmental relations. And when I first saw this and different separation, I thought, oh no, please let's not go where I think they're going in, because what we don't want to have, and I've seen this, it would be horrible to have. You would have to have a proposition for high school A, and another proposition for high school B, and another one for C, and then an elementary school. Thank God that we can put them all together, because when that happens, and I've seen some of this, is that you start separating your voters. So now you have parents that say, well, my kids go to this school, I'm not going to pay for this one over here. And then the people that really, and like in all school districts, if you have, there's a pocket of people that really go out and vote, that group, they will control everything. So thank God that did not go through. Okay, so now, big one. And not only are you going to have a different proposition for a gymnasium or a stadium that you're going to have in there, but every single proposition is going to have this in there. This is a property increase. In bold letters and all capitals. So as you go out and vote, and they say construction equipment of school buildings, and we're going to do $5 million, which is pocket change to a lot of people. I remember when I first started working in this, you could build an elementary school for $3 million. Now we can't get under $30 million. But every single proposition, no matter what it is, after it states that the amount and with the purpose, there will be this statement right here, this is a property increase.
It has to be capital letters.
Yeah, in capital letters. Yes, ma'am.
Juan, you have told the voters, as many of us do, that this particular bond referendum, there's going to be no tax rate increase. If we structured it that way, we still have to have that language.
Very good question. And one of our clients that I mentioned to you is calling a bond election, and we went and spent a lot of time going through the Secretary of State's office and the Attorney General's office, because what we were saying was, and what the superintendent was telling us and staff was, we really are not increasing the taxes. Because what we're doing is we have been able to pay off some debt, our property values have increased, and we're going to keep it at a low level. And they wanted us to be able to provide kind of like a caveat or an explanation saying, yes, we're required to say this, however, in reality, we're not foreseeing there to be that much of a property or a property tax increase at all. And both the Secretary of State's office and the Texas Attorney General's office came back to us and said, no, cannot do that. And we said, but state law, the education code, the election code says that the governmental body can be able to, they're the ones that put together the ballot and the propositions. And they said, no, this legislature was very clear, this is what they want you to put in there. Now, however, what they did say is that now we're required to do a voter information document, and in that document, and we see a lot of schools that will do a bond pamphlet, that it's a handout, explains things. Well, now you're required to do that. And they said, in your voter information document, when you're preparing and making your presentations, go ahead and explain what you mean, that it really is not going to be that much of a tax increase, or it may not be a tax increase. So that's the only way that you can be able to then do this. The other thing that House Bill 477 did, it amended the order, what is to appear in the order calling the bond election. It primarily tweaked the requirements, because we already in our bond order required to go out and having to let's see if I can get it. You're already required to post the amount of debt that is outstanding at the time, the interest rate that you think it's going to be, and you're also required to have language as to the total tax, the total debt that you have outstanding. All of that is going to be in the bond order, and by the way, you're required to not only put that on your website, that order, and also at the polling places, and also where you put your agendas and pre-public places in your area. A lot of places to be out there. Now, instead, it used to require that you would look at your fiscal year, the impact of the fiscal year. Now what they're saying, what the impact is currently. So if we call the bond election tomorrow, we put as of this day, this is what we anticipate that your taxes are going to be and what the outstanding debt is going to be. So we are, those are the things that are being required. But again, the voter information document that we have. So let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, so here's what I mean. So the voter information document, you have to include your school ballot language or your proposition. So we still have here for the construction and equipping of school buildings, but remember, here's where it is, right here. This is a property increase. Whoops. What did I do, Jesus?
You pick something.
I'm not very technology. Okay, so here we go. So there it is. So there it is. So we're going to do a stadium. It would be the issuance of an amount not to exceed blank for the construction and equipping of a stadium in the district, in the levying of a tax and payment thereof. This is a property tax increase. So that language, not only is it going to be in the ballot, but also in the pamphlet that the school district is required to go out and give to the voters. You also have to include this right there, front and center. You're also going to have to put in information regarding the amount of debt that you're looking at. 500 million, 200 million, everything's over in the hundreds of millions. The estimated interest for the debt to be authorized, the total debt that you think is going to be, the estimated combined principal and interest payment required on time, and in full the debt obligations to be authorized. That's a good one, because not only are they asking you to break down what the principal amount now is and the interest rate, now they want you to combine it and say, by the way, if you vote for this, this is how much of the annual payments are going to be they're going to have to be paid by the district. And then it also wants you, and this is the bond that we called it, where more current information as of February the 13th, 2020, or whatever date that you call the bond election. Then you have to provide the information of all the outstanding debt as of that time, the remaining interest in all the outstanding debt, and all the and then the combined principal interest payments that are going to be required at all times to make payment on all your bonds or all your outstanding obligations. Now you see where I'm saying that it's become more and more difficult to try to get these financings done. Again, you know, somebody may argue and say, well, that's good information to know. It is, and that information is always there. But now you're going to make that and show it to you and say, here it is. Here it is. So just in case you had some questions, so now you know what you're voting for. The other information is the estimated maximum annual increase in the amount of taxes that would be imposed on a resident. So if your homestead is $100,000, then you're supposed to provide how much is going to be needed on an annual basis, the maximum annual basis that will be needed to pay that obligation if it's approved. So now it's getting more and more down to home, so that if you're, then you can be able to compare and say, well, my house is worth $150,000, my house is worth $200,000. Then you can double it or 1.5 times. You can see what that's going to cost you if you support the bond issuances. Okay, and providing that information, it allows you to be able to provide assumptions as far as the interest rate, the growth of the district, and so forth. Again, all of this voter information document is something that has to be prepared by the school district and has to be handed out. And you have to give this information and also placed on your website and provide more information to be informed. Then here, right here, Renee, is where you could be able to then, and these are all, this is right from straight from the law, and this is where it is. We enumerated and put them down. Number 4, then it says the district deems the following information necessary to or relevant to explain the information on this document. Here's where you say, yes, I am required to put down that it is a tax increase. However, this is what our values, our taxable values are at this point. This is where we anticipate. We're also going to be paying off some debt. And here's what we're trying to do to stay within the parameters or make it affordable to you. So here's the opportunity right here to be able to do that. Okay. The other thing, the requirements that we saw in the legislative session is that we already talked about the sample ballot that has to be posted, and then you also, there's laws that govern that says that the weighted average of the maturity of the general obligation bonds cannot exceed the average economic life of the improvements and personal property financing. I believe it's 120%. That they're looking at. So what that means, all that means is that if you're going to buy a bus and you have a bond election for a bus and you think that the bus is going to last you I don't know how long it will last, 8 years, 10 years, then you really cannot be financing for more than 10 years for that particular piece of equipment. So they're looking into that to make sure that the school districts are not going to go ahead and burden people with finances that are going to last a lot longer than what the equipment or what the improvements you're going to try to make. Another requirement is that any kind of unspent proceeds, and sometimes some school districts will have some unspent money after they finish the bond projects that they have been approved by the voters. You cannot repurpose those things unless you have a public meeting. I always felt that's always prudent to do, and I always felt that you probably needed to do that. But now the law says we have to do that. And then,
Juan, would that include the interest that you have accumulated over 5-6 years?
Yes, because as you know, the bond proceeds and interest earned is considered to be bond proceeds. So if there's a repurpose now, but the repurpose means that now you have something that was approved for a new football stadium, and you have that money left over. Now you want to use some of that money for the gymnasium or for classrooms. You would need to go. The board needs to publicly have a meeting and say, okay, let's do that. It's not a big obstacle, but you still have to go out there and make sure that the board does approve this, the change.
Doesn't that happen usually already, like?
Yes.
Local governments already. Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
and that's what-
For this, and so that's not that.
And that's what I was saying, I think it's prudent and things like that, but now we're required to do that.
Is there a public hearings or anything requirement or a minimum vote for that to happen?
No, all it says is that it has to have a public meeting, you have to discuss it, and you have to post it, just, public meeting means, you have to post the agenda 72 hours prior to, well, all the things that are required right now to be able to get it done. Okay, so, let's move on, because I'm not looking. So now, this is, we put together a calendar for bond elections. So from here, I think one of the important things is to look at is that if you're looking at calling a bond election, or your board's looking at calling a bond election for May, it has to be done by no later than Valentine's Day, Friday the 15th. So that's for a May election. And if you're thinking about calling a bond election for November uniform election day, then that election day is going to be, the very last day of the latest data to approve an order calling bond elections Monday, August 17, 2020. The early voting is going to begin April 20th for the May election and October 17, 2020 for the November election. The election day, as I mentioned, May elections, first Saturday in May, which is going to be May 2nd this year. And for, if you want to have a November election, then it's going to be the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, which this year is November 3rd, 2020. So that has not changed. We're still using that. Okay, so I'm going to go through this real fast because we are running out of time. So, school districts, like most governmental entities, we have the Dillon's rule, which means that you can only do what the state law or the laws allow you to do. So and we get questions all the time, if a district wants to go out and borrow money from a local bank, we'll pay them back in 30 days or something like that. You have to go out and find a law that allows the school district to be able to enter into that kind of an agreement. Because then you have an issue. Now, I've had some counties that have been going through the local bank for a while. The problem that they have is not so much the school district or the county, but it's the bank, because it could be, technically, be found to be an invalid obligation where it wasn't approved, so therefore the school district isn't owing anything. So banks are starting to get a little bit wiser, because now they say, well, pursuant to such and such a law, they want to make sure that you're authorized and you have the authority to be able to enter into those type of agreements. So that's the Dillon's rule. We always have to look to see what does the state law say in order to see what a school district and what kind of financing a school district needs to utilize in order to be able to do their projects. So, general obligation bonds, and I mentioned that this is what we traditionally see school districts use for major projects, and this requires a bond election. And then we can use this for construction, renovation, and acquisition of school buildings and other projects. And you can also purchase the sites for those projects. The bonds or the obligations are paid out of interest and sinking fund taxes. And as you all know, there's two types of taxes. And we know maintenance and operation taxes that pay for your upkeep of your buildings and pay salaries, very importantly. That's maintenance and operation taxes. And then you have your interest and sinking fund taxes. Those are payable, only payable, can be used to pay debt. Now, most of us, you get your taxes at the end of the year, you get one number, $1.36, $1.25, or whatever it is. That's the entire amount. But part of that is going to be maintenance and operation. And part of it is going to be your debt payment, which is your interest and sinking fund. Most of the obligations that are paid are going to be utilizing an unlimited tax pledge. And I say most, because I was educated when we did some work for Houston ISD. Houston ISD has limited tax, even though it's voted tax, but it's limited it's unlimited. Most school districts have unlimited tax. That's beautiful and great for a person that's interested in buying the bonds, and that's more security, because a school district can, and when you vote these things, you're voting for unlimited tax school building bonds. It means that, what does that mean? That means that the school district can raise your taxes to pay your debt, not your maintenance and operation, as high as it needs to in order to be able to pay the debt. So if a major business moves out of your school district, if the values go down, that means taxes have to go up in order to meet your debt obligations. And when you have voted debt, that means that the school district can raise taxes as high as they need to in order to meet its obligations. That's what unlimited tax bonds are. In addition to that, the general obligation bonds are eligible for the permanent school fund guarantee, which is a wonderful program from the state of Texas. Only school districts can be able to go out and it's like an insurance. And what it is it used to be $200, $300, now I think it's like $1,000 something. I forget how much it is that a school district pays in insurance. But if you have, again, the bondholders, if you're buying bonds from your school district, number one, they're unlimited tax pledge, which means the taxes can go up, and so you feel like, okay, this is good. I'm willing to buy these bonds. And then the other thing is you have the permanent school fund guarantee, which is the state of Texas guarantees that the payment will be made on those bonds. So the school district says, we can't do it this year. It's going to be tough, whatever. Permanent school fund comes in. However, the permanent school fund says, next payment that's going to go to the district, we're just going to deduct that amount, and we guarantee. But it's good, again, to have this permanent school fund guarantee because, again, it affects your interest rate. Bondholders, people are willing to buy bonds and accept a lower interest rate because they know, number one, they're being pledged with unlimited taxes, and they're also being pledged, you have the permanent school fund guarantee and insurance behind it to pay for those bonds. And they're tax exempt for the most part. Some of them are not, but for the most part. So all of these are good things that a bondholder is willing to accept a lower interest payment and in effect help the school district with the construction of the buildings and construction projects that they're going to be looking at. So that's what we got with general obligation debt. That's voted debt. The other thing that's available, and this is the one that I was alluding to with Mr. Armesco here, lease purchase bonds. It's kind of a hybrid. You create a nonprofit corporation, which is generally the school board members. They issue debt. They build the building. They turn around and lease it to the school. The school makes payment, rent payments, lease payments to the corporation. The corporation uses those funds to pay off the debt. And then you're able to then construct your projects. Why is this something people are looking at? Well, number one, it does not require a bond election. First you're required to publish a notice, and you wait 60 days. And if you do not have a petition that is signed by 5% of the registered voters, then that means that the taxpayer said, hey, we're okay for you to go ahead and do that project. I'm not signing a petition, we're pro, so you can go ahead and move forward and do that. Here, the lease payment is primarily made out of payment on taxes. That comes out of your maintenance and operation taxes, which, remember, I told you that's what pays your your salaries and your also your upkeep of the buildings, it comes out of there or any other legally available funds. The other thing, sometimes, now it's, school districts are, the M&O tax rate has been compressed, and will be compressed even further. So that's becoming more and more of a challenge where a district really wants to be able to use this type of a vehicle or financing to be able to finance the projects. This particular one only can do new construction. Right, Jesus? No renovations. And Jesus, as I said, is the master. He said, well, okay, we can't do this, but what if I put a wing in this school? We'll just put it from right this point on to that point, And so, yes, we can do that. We will go ahead and have an agreement, and all of these things are all set up. The biggest thing about this is that there is with lease purchases, there is going to be a lien that is going to be placed on the property as a security. With voted bonds, the district is just handed over and said, here you go, here's the money you need. And the security is your taxes. Well, here, there's going to be a lien on the property. That's why the law says the Attorney General's office will not allow you to do an improvement or renovation because they're going to require you to have a lien, and the Attorney General's office does not want you, for example, we needed to do a new roof on this building. They'll say, I don't want you to give up the lien on the entire building just for the roof. So you can only do new construction, which includes a wing. No PSF guarantee, so that means you're going to have to be paying a little bit more for the interest. Maintenance tax notes, we're seeing this quite a bit. This is done only for maintenance purposes, and we're using it a lot for doing renovations on school buildings and different kinds of things. This also does not require an election. Now, I haven't been mentioning this, but as you notice, this is payable within 20 years. General obligation bonds is 40 years. Lease revenue bonds is 25 years. That's important a lot of times for school districts because they're saying, if I have to pay this in 20 years, if I have to pay this, that means my payment's going to be higher. So that means I can't afford it. So that's when your bond attorneys and your financial advisor come in and they'll work with the district to come up and see which is the best vehicle to use to do financing. Contractual obligations strictly for personal property. And I keep going back to Jesus, but Jesus wanted me to go out there and was doing a kitchen, and we had some sinks. Remember Jesus? And Jesus said, but they have wheels down at the bottom, and we can just disconnect them and move them around, And I went to the Attorney General's office, and they said, no. Once you hook up the pipes to the building, then that becomes a fixture, and you cannot use contractual obligations to be able to do that type of financing. The Attorney General's office is crazy. I mean, we had, I don't know if it was Laredo IC, but I went in there one time, and we've been able to do portable buildings using contractual obligations for many, many years. And was it you guys that we wanted to do like about 40 of them at one time or something? And the Attorney General's office said, no, that's a campus. That's not a portable building. So they came back and said, no, you can't do that. So it's interesting, how you can be able to use these things and the challenges that you have. Payable M&O taxes only, 25 years. Time warrants, it used to be, we never saw any of these things. I've done a couple of them just recently, because it used to be that you could not exceed $500,000. Now they upped it to $1 million, which is nothing in today's world. But now, and I've did a couple of them, you can be able to use time warrants, does not require an election, and you can do new construction as long as the amount does not exceed $1 million, repayment 15 years. Any questions? I will move into, let me see. Okay, I got about 5 minutes. So let me move into federal securities laws, and I'll do this real fast. This is very important. Generally what we have is bonds do not have to be registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. They're exempt from registration. However, there are some rules that apply to the tax-exempt financings, which have to do with anti-fraud. You cannot go out and tell bondholders, oh, we have a great district, our taxable values are increasing, they're skyrocketing, and we don't have any problems at all. If it's not true, then you can't do that. And then you have rules that have to do with continuing disclosure, and now we'll talk about both of these in a second. So, continuing disclosure, Rule 15C212, you have to produce an offering document, and some of you, like when you buy Apple or you're buying some kind of a private corporation stocks, you have what they call prospectus, and they're a little booklet, and you open it up, and it tells you a lot of history, a lot of information about the company, projections, audits and so forth. All that is presented. Well, we have the same requirement for governmental entities. We have to produce an offering document, and also school districts and governmental entities are required to provide continuing information, which means that on an annual basis, you're to report certain events that you do, some events that are material, some events that are not, and all that information is all kept in a registry. And people that are interested in buying the bonds, they can go out and look up Houston ISD or Radar ISD or whatever, and they can be able to see, have they been filing their audits on time? Have there been any issues? What's going on with this? So they can be able to make an informed decision. This is an offering document, or the table of contents for an offering document for one of the school districts that we represent. And you see in here on the tax information, well, not only do we talk about the school district, and we talk about the state and local funding laws in the state of Texas, we also talk about the current school finance system. We talk about, here's all the information that's probably very important to a taxpayer that says, or I'm sorry, a bondholder, that says, the valuations that you're looking at of the school district. We're looking at also the tax-supported debt that you have for the district, the tax rate, the levy, and the collections history. At what rate have you been collecting your taxes? And then the 10 largest taxpayers. In some cases, it's not a big deal, because on some school districts that we represent, the 10 largest taxpayers is 1% or 2%. But we also represent some small school district that the 10 largest taxpayers is 68–70% of the total tax base. Imagine again, when I say one of those guys moves out or something happens, this is what the bondholder wants to know. All of this information is required. It's presented once in the offering document when you're selling the bonds, and then you're also going to be required on an annual basis to provide that information, because all of this is fluid. All of this changes. So all of this needs to be provided to the bondholders. Okay, so as I mentioned, continual disclosure requires annual reports on an annual basis, and then you also have to have event notices. If certain events happen, you also have to report that. So the annual reports are filed, and it says has to be filed within 6 months of the end of each fiscal year. So this is going to be provided, and the school district says when they enter into a contract, and they say we're going to provide, like for example, all those tables, we're going to give you all the tax history, we're going to give you all this information, what our outstanding debt is, and they have to do that on an annual basis and continue to do that while the debt is outstanding. Event notices. These are specific events that we had here that if any of these things happen, like a bond call, a defeasance, anything, there's an unscheduled draw on a credit enhancement, and there's a non-payment, all of these events would have to be reported to EMA, to the registry. So it's a registry so people know what's going on with the school district. The ones in red here is new, and these are the ones that have become a challenge. 1 through 14, generally your financial advisor and the bond attorneys were in tune and working with the school districts, and we would know. Is there a problem? Principal and interest payment hasn't been made? Well, we would know, they would find out, and then we have to report that. If the audit was not filed on a timely basis or continuous voting, then we would find out these things. This has thrown a monkey wrenches these last two right here, because those are more difficult for your consultants, professional consultants, to know what's going on. It's only the district that knows what is going on. And I'll go into that a little bit more in detail, if I can turn the page. So the two new events: incurrence of a financial obligation of the board or the school district, if material, and that's very important, if material, or agreement to covenants, events of defaults, remedies, priority rights, and other similar terms of financial obligations of the board or the district, which affect the holders if material. So that means that if a school district, and again, I represent some large ones, and I represent some small ones. If a school district, one of my small school districts, enters into a lease for computers, Dell computers, remember, Jesus? And if it's, $2 million, and you have an annual budget of $10 million, well, that's material. That's a big contract. That has to be disclosed. Now, a $2 million lease for Houston ISD, I think Renee has that in his pocket right now, so you don't have to worry about making a payment. I pick on Renee, but he didn't think it was funny. In other words, I'm saying for a larger school district, a $2 million obligation is non-material. And it doesn't say you didn't make a payment or whatever, it says you enter into an obligation of some kind, and it includes leases. Bus leases, computer leases. I've seen leases for scoreboards. I mentioned scoreboards, those kind of things. If it's material, then you need to report that. And also if there's any kind of default or accelerations. Now, you will be asked whenever you do bond financings, I promise you that the Underwriters Council and your underwriters are going to ask you, have you entered into any, are you familiar with the new two rule, the two new additions to material events notices? And what practices do you have in place in your district to know of what's going on? We have some school districts, for example, that will say, anything over $5 million, we have to report it. And we will let bond counsel and financial advisor know of what we're doing with anything over $5 million. If it's less than that, we have some school districts that's saying, no, it's a lot higher than that. So it depends. Again, the operative phrase here is, but if material. So that's important. That has to be reported, and if it's not reported, you can run into some problems. Liability, and here's almost done. Two more, I think, slides. The liability, if you have some fraud that is in place, then there are some fines and penalties that can happen, and injunctions and criminal liability. This second one right here, it says, the last bullet, liability reaches to just not the governmental entity, but those officials and staff of such entities. Which means, and we've always done this, we have these official statements and they just say, all in favor of the financing, and we put in there, we've approved the offering document, all in favor say aye, that's it. If there's any misrepresentation, if there's any fraud or anything, the board members and the staff can also have personal liability. And there were some recent cases where the mayor of a city was fined and had to serve some time because of this activity. Now, it has to be fraud. If, for example, I mentioned those 10 top business taxpayers, and you know that Walmart's going to be leaving in next month, and they're closing down, and that's 25% of your total asset taxable values in your property, that is something you need to disclose. If you don't disclose that, and you know that it's going to happen, then you could get personal liability on that misrepresentation. This is all good because the bondholders want to make an informed decision as to whether they want you to buy your bonds or not. And this is all the vehicles and the mechanisms that have been set up so that they will then be able to make informed decisions. So as long as there's not fraud, as long as there's not any misrepresentation that is done on purpose, then we're going to be okay. But it's very important that everybody knows that the information that is going to be there is accurate. All the information that you provide on the offering document and whatever information you provide on a continual basis. Another example, we used to sit down in big rooms and big office desks all the way around with tables, and we would look at these offering documents. So we just did one for DFW, talking about a huge financing, and people would sit down and say, page 1, anybody have any comments or any changes? No. Page 2, anything on that? Page 3. They found a city where the bond attorneys, the financial advisors, everybody was found to have fined and a responsibility because they were not really paying attention. So there's a due diligence, there is a responsibility that's on your consultants, your professional consultants, but also to you all as being the staff people to make sure that the information is accurate. And then, by the way, your board members are also going to be liable. So you don't want to have a board member upset with you because there was some information that they weren't told that, and now they're liable. Okay. Now we have, there's been a reorganization 10 years ago. It's a little bit dated here, but still, there is an enforcement division that is specifically looking, and their job is to look at any kind of public finance activity. That's within the Securities and Exchange Commission. And then now we have the MCBC initiative, which is the reporting of whether there was some, I'm drawing a blank. Help me out, Renee. The MCBC, you have to report on an annual basis, and your information has to be truthful, and then your underwriter, they're also responsible to come in, and if for some reason they were involved in a financing, and the financing was not, then later on the reporting wasn't done on an annual basis that you're required to be doing, or something happened you didn't do, you're supposed to report that. So now the onus is now also on the underwriters, the sponsoring, and also on the schools. Okay, so lastly here, I think, well, you should consider adopting the disclosure policy, and these are some of the questions we're starting to see more and more, where when you're doing a bond issuance, you should have something in writing that says, okay, whenever we have a public a bond issuance, our finance team is the first one to look over all the financial information. They have to sign off on this. We have certain people that have to sign off on this. On the legal side, if there's any kind of lawsuits that are pending, we send that to the legal department or to our general counsel. They sign off on this, and you have a written policy in place so that way you will be able to meet your obligations and not have anything fall through the cracks. So that's very important. And then we would recommend that you adopt a disclosure policy that would be in place. And this is, I think you all have this. This is an approach to drafting a disclosure policy. And I think everybody got the information, so just you can see. Any questions? And again, I think I went 10 minutes over. Did I keep my promise? Did I keep you all excited about this work? It's interesting, and it's to me, I get a lot of pleasure. I'm sorry, question.
Can you say that again about advertising on scoreboard that was purchased with bonds?
Yeah. So real quickly, you can issue, a school district can issue debt, and I'm talking about when you issue debt and you're issuing tax exempt debt. And going to the example I had, the scoreboard. And we had a school district wanted to do a scoreboard, and say, fine. We went through a test, the test, real quickly, and it's gonna bore you even more. If 10% of the proceeds are being used for a public purpose, so here we had a scoreboard about this big, and about 25% of that had Walmart, Whataburger, whatever it was on this stuff, that would always be appearing. So that, right there, that was more than 10% of the proceeds going to be used for a private activity, right? And then the other test is, if more than 10% of your payment for this obligation is coming directly or indirectly from for the public purpose, a private purpose, which is the sale of the ads, then at that point in our particular school district, I think they were looking at about 80% of the financing was going to be paid through the sale of ads. We came back and said, we recommend that you do a taxable financing as opposed to tax exempt financing. And that's where it is. Now, if your school district has a fund balance of several $1 million and they say, we're going to pay for this scoreboard, then you're okay, because you can finance it, you can pay. There might be some other laws that I'm not familiar with, I don't do general counsel stuff, but for my purposes, for tax exempt obligations, you cannot do a private activity, and that's always been around. We found out later that there's some vendors that are going around, number one, saying, hey, build a scoreboard, zero financing for 10 years, zero. And as we all know, there's no such thing as zero financing. So we had, what if we pay cash? Well, we'll then reduce the price of the scoreboard. And the other thing in there, I saw the documents that said that this is going to be done as a tax exempt basis. They wanted the school district, to sign an 8038 that said that this was going to be used for tax exempt purposes. And all these schools were doing this, and I think they're doing that. And here's a red light or a bulb should have come up and said, this is something you should not do. And that's always consult with your attorneys and your financial advisors and ask them questions to see, what do you think about this? They could come back and say, no, you're okay. Ask them to put it in writing, that way you can file it. And if the IRS ever comes around or something, you can say, well, my bond attorney told me this, and then they can go after me. Or somebody else. And we wouldn't tell you to do it, but anyway, that was a good question. Any other questions? So it's interesting, the public finance, I got into this a long time ago, and it's interesting because I've represented school districts where they needed to borrow $800,000 because they can't meet payroll, and then we got to go out there and get them $800,000. And then we have school districts that are doing, $1.2 billion in a bond election, and I'm still doing $1 million and so forth. So there's always a lot of interesting things that are coming up all the time, and it just keeps us on our toes. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Let me turn off my mic so that I won't be getting in trouble. It's still being recorded.
Take about a 5-minute break and then we'll go back to the next.
My partner
So that means July, little road, the biggest bump is
Days
to get started. The food is probably en route, so whenever it gets here, we'll, assess where we're at that time. So you hear some strange noises, it's my stomach growling on the side. I try not to have the mic on, because you will hear it. Okay, so our next presentation,
Blackwell.
yes, diversity, equity, inclusion, policy, and legal issues. Give me a second, I want to make sure that, oh, did I go wrong? Okay. We have Arturo, Michelle, and Sandy.
Hello.
Gomez. And I appreciate your coming to visit with us. And I know that you guys were driving or coming in from somewhere else here. And I know sometimes with the weather and so on. So we appreciate you taking the time to be with us here. So please help me welcome Sandy and Arturo.
Just to give you all a real brief who we are and why you should listen to us at all. Arturo and I are both partners at Hush Blackwell. As Sue said, we concentrate in governmental entities, especially K-12s, junior colleges, and other public entities. And both of us spend a great deal of our practice on issues of governance, board governance, ethics, procurement, and the like. So hence why we're in front of you, lovely folks who live your world in finance. But in addition to all those things, Arturo was the city attorney for the city of Houston under Mayor Bill White. That is perfect because of what we're about to talk about, because he actually lived through the city's first diversity program and changes. So I say that so that you know when he starts talking about it, he actually lived through it. So when y'all saw this topic, y'all probably thought many things, but what we're going to be talking to you about is adopting in the common language an NWE program or other diversity-based program that you use in your procurement process. So this isn't about employment or retention or student diversity or anything like that. It's really for you procurement folks and what that would look like if you wanted to implement some type of program in your purchasing system. Okay. We start pretty much every procurement speech that we give telling everybody to go back to the fundamental principles. Because if you go back to the fundamental principles of public spend, you'll usually get the right answer. And I learned that many years ago from Arturo when I was complaining about low bid or something like that, and he said, Sandy, you realize that spending public money is not just about getting the cheapest thing for the cheapest price. And I thought, well, yeah, I guess I know that. He's like, no, because this is about a whole other set of values that underbid the public spend. And it goes back to the Constitution of the United States. It goes back to the Constitution of the state of Texas. It goes back to England if you want to get, but he's way smarter than me, so he talks about that kind of stuff. But basically, if you fundamentally follow these general values in your purchasing, you're going to come up with the right answer. Accountability, general ethics, being impartial, being a service to the public good, and being transparent. So we always start with that to remind people that that's where you're going to be deriving from. Okay? Not clicking this again. There you go. But an NWBE program, you might have many people come to you. Most of these will be board members or senior executives in your departments, your superintendent or the like that's interested in it. And so you're going to say, what is the point of having any kind of diversity inclusion in your purchasing? Because a lot of people will say, well, that's not fair. And a lot of people will say, well, it's been unfair, the fact that people have been excluded from the public spend for so many years. So these are some of the reasons that you can use to encourage NWPE programs or to explain why you might want to pursue an NWPE program.
and there's been increased interest in this area, in many areas, to have more diversity. And the public sector is a little different. For example, Walmart in an area will use the same contractors forever as long as they do the job, and no one thinks any different about that. In the public sector, when you use public dollars, people feel that they are kept out of it, and then that becomes kind of a delicate process many times for people who work on the government side in terms of what you do. I heard State Senator Boris Miles say something that I thought was very to this point, where he was asked by someone, I've been trying to get work from a particular state agency and it hasn't happened. Can you do anything for me? And Senator Miles said, if you really wanted to, I could probably get you a meeting with the head of the agency. But I'm not going to do anything further because I don't want to go to jail. And he goes, and if you really want to do something, after the fact usually doesn't work very well. You need to be active in the process when they make changes to their procurement, when they're involved in soliciting, the associations you're involved with. That's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And many people don't think of it the way Senator Miles did, and he thinks of it because he's been involved in the process. So it's different than what many people are used to when it comes to buying goods and services.
And the reason that this topic came up for us, especially talking to Ms. Seuss about this, we have both been working on procurement programs and board policies related to NWBE for years. Like I said, Arturo has been doing this really since the early days in the city. But in the last few years, I would say the last 2 or 3, you've seen some changes in your boards and even expanding further out into some of your more traditional suburban and even rural areas where you have board members that are much more interested in this. So we've seen a significant uptick in people starting to have questions about this. And so that's really what the political interest has increased. And so if you haven't had this question, odds are you're going to have it sometime in the next few years. All right?
And it often comes up with a bond program, where there are additional dollars to spend.
I was thinking that when Eduardo was talking, I
Yeah.
thought this is a perfect segue because nobody cares until you've got $1 billion, and then everybody cares about including that money. So this is going to come up, and they're going to want it tomorrow, and you need to at least know the language and the details and to be prepped on how you can achieve some of the policy goals that your people might want to do while remaining legally compliant. Okay? So that's what we're going to walk y'all through. We are hoping that we will balance some fairly esoteric, kind of boring constitutional stuff with some pragmatic advice and real life experiences that we've had. Arturo and I could talk forever about anything. We really, really, really like questions. So please, guys, if you have a question and want to interrupt us, if it's not, we like that. We prefer that. So especially as we're talking about common law cases and you're all glaze over. So you have all of these general policy reasons of why you have an NWBE program. But the law tells us that you can only have the purpose for an NWBE program is this. It's when you've had past conditions in your market that basically disadvantage people. And then you realize that you can implement a program that can make a change to that. That's the legal reason why you can adopt a program like this in a nutshell. We're going to get into this in more detail, but that's the basics of it.
And one thing that's important to remember is MWBE can mean a wide range of things. It can include additional effort to reach minority contractors, advertising in newspapers, sessions in particular geographic areas. What Sandy's talking about when she's talking about what you need to show legally is when race or national origin is factored in as a criteria. In other words, points can be awarded in terms of selection for particular goods or service. But in the broader sense, MWBE includes any effort that is intended to increase minority participation.
And you can have, and we'll talk about this more at the end in terms of outreach, but you can have programs to increase participation
that don't have any kind of classification associated with it. It can just be merely a goal of, we want more vendors doing business with us. And the result of having more vendors is all of those things. It's more competition, better prices, better quality services. So when you're talking about a program of increasing participation, there's a million ways to skin a cat, so to speak. The one where you use race or national origin triggers a particular constitutional question that makes it where you have to really follow the rules. But you gotta start with, y'all are all schools, but even within your schools, some of y'all will have federal funding programs that could trigger different, more specific rules than what we're gonna go over in the general constitutional sense. So the first question you ask is, can I even do this of any kind for the institution that I am? And also know the letters, because y'all are, if you were not familiar with this entity, we just jumped in and said MWBE. That's Minority Women Business Enterprise. And I'll be parceling some down, but y'all probably don't care about the detail. The minority constitutional analysis is different from the women constitutional analysis. And you can have DBEs, which is federal, disadvantaged business enterprises. You can have hubs, which is historically underutilized businesses, which is state. There's a lot of acronyms. The MWBE is kind of the general easy to talk about. But know your funding source. You could be triggering a state or a federal rule that would put an additional requirement on you. So can you people, can school districts do this at all? Arturo has had much fun analyzing 44031 over the years to figure this out. And this is what you come up with, right?
Right.
So in 44031, you all know there's the list of factors to be considered. So one of them says the ability to comply with rules relating to health. There is a catch-all that was adopted more recently to that says any relevant factor. So the question is, does that hub language allow you to have an MWBE program? Arturo, does it allow you to have
That's
the million-dollar question?
you know, lawyers are, we get paid to look at things closely and make arguments, and, you know, when you look at historically utilized business, that's used as a term of art in the government code and local government code, and it is defined with regard to state agencies, and it applies to state agencies, not local governments or special districts. Although one could make the argument that it's used in 44031, it is not intended to be a term of art. It's meant more commonly, generically. But I'm not sure I would feel that comfortable arguing before a judge. The judge would agree with me on that. So you have that issue of whether it falls within that. But I think it's a risky venture to say that provision, historically underutilized businesses, provides a basis in which to take race or national origin into account in a contracting program.
And there's this AG opinion that came out in the early 90s, and this is also the AG opinion that talks a lot about local preference as well, and it says that the MWBE program was not provided for. That was before the statute was revised to have the relevant factors.
Yeah, and that opinion is when Dan Morales was the Attorney General, and it had to do with Dallas ISD, and it asked various questions like, can we give preference if someone lives within our boundaries, if someone contributes to our foundation, does this, can we use an MWBE program? And uniformly, Mr. Morales said no, 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 no. And he goes back to the early cases from the early 60s on public contracting to say, you're trying to get the best price for the best value. And if something doesn't expressly relate to that, then what the Attorney General has said is, that is not a consideration you can use in purchase.
But when you combine it now with the all relevant factors, because clearly the legislature, when they wrote 44031, they were thinking about hubs. I mean, it was in their minds. So when you couple that with the all relevant factors, it takes you to this sort of constitutional question. Okay, we think that you have the power under your enabling statutes. Now, what is it that you can actually do? So there's various approaches to having a diversity program, just like we said. There's specific participation, we are going to have 15% of Asian Americans in the engineering professional services. Okay, you get as narrow as that. There is more generalized goals of we're going to increase participation. But then there's alternative small business programs, and then there's just straight up just pursuing some outreach. So we're going to walk you through these different options and tell you what you should be looking for when you're implementing them. The big two of specific goals programs is disparity and good faith efforts. So we're going to spend some time on disparity. How many of you have heard of disparity studies? Two? Disparity what? A disparity study. Oh, your mind's about to be blown. And we're not going to show you any statistics. We're going to avoid that. That's a whole other consultant that we have to hire. So for specific participation, you are going to adopt a policy that has specific numbers in it. You have triggered a potential constitutional question. And this is the most basic constitutional question that if you got sued and we had to go into court, this is what we are going to have to prove. We are going to have to prove that there was a compelling governmental interest in pursuing this program, and that your program was narrowly tailored to solve that interest. That means probably absolutely nothing to y'all. We're going to tell you what that means.
Yeah. Compelling means, in the courts have been pretty clear that in contracting, it means you're trying to remedy past discrimination. You know, in other areas, it's a little different. For example, you probably are at least familiar in passing with the higher education cases concerning the use of race in admissions. And there, like in the Bakke case, the court has said, well, there's a value to having diversity in an academic environment. But when it comes to purchasing, the courts have been pretty clear. It is only really for the only compelling reason is going to be a remedial purpose, which means you have to show that there was a problem in the past. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're showing you are still guilty of discriminatory practices, but the market could have been tainted. The language the courts use is the present effects of past discrimination. And that would permit the type of evidence that would support a program like this.
And the courts have said that what they like the most in terms of their evidence, so I'm sitting down with you and I say, okay, let's make our case, is statistical evidence. That's the bellwether, that's the best piece of evidence that I can offer. It doesn't mean that I couldn't necessarily parse together arguments with other pieces. But if you start from scratch, I'm going to tell you legally, we want statistical evidence to back up this program.
And I think one thing to note, for what Sandy talks about the Croson case, is that a lot of people assume a program like this means we're going to have and I'm just throwing numbers out there. We believe there's been a problem in the past that currently affects the ability of minority contractors to participate. We're going to have a 10% goal, and we're going to award points for that in our contracting. Many people think, well, if you fall within a minority group, then every single contract is going to have 10%. When you read something broad like that, what it means is that is an annual overall goal, kind of a compilation of the components. And what the courts require is not every minority group or gender is going to be treated the same, because the disparity is going to be different, most likely, when you look at the evidence. And it's also going to be different depending on the type of good or service that you're buying. So when I was at the city of Houston, there was a contractor, a sidewalk contractor, and people who do sidewalk work, low barriers to entry. There are a number of minority contractors in that. The goal was pretty high. A person who was not a minority sued the city, sued Metro, and it hung around in Judge Hughes' court for a long time. And then when I was city attorney, it started ramping up again. And so we settled it by doing a new disparity study. Because one of the things about disparity studies is A, they take a little time, B, they're expensive, and C, before too long it becomes stale. Because at some point when you're sued, the courts are looking at the evidence that's developed right then, and if your program doesn't match it, then you have problems in defending the program. So what is done is periodically there are disparity studies. So we did one, I think, in about 2006, and then what happened is it caused a lot of problems within the city, not from the plaintiff, but from city council and others, because the study showed that women were not underrepresented. It was an MWE program. And people were like, no, that can't be. How can that be? And it caused such a furor that a second disparity study was done that went in more in depth, and it did find some disparity, some discrimination, and that became the new study. And then the city did another one, I think, around 2015. So these kind of continue. And the comment I made before about depending on what the good or service is, sidewalk contractors, there are a number in the geographic area, and you're only looking at the geographic area because you kind of have some set of numbers to look at when you're looking at past disparity. And when you look at sidewalk contractors, the percentage goal can be fairly high. When you get into, the city does water sewer work, when you get into these big pipes, putting those in underneath, it's practically nil because there are not minority contractors to do that. So when goals are being set by the purchasing department, it's going to be different according to the gender, race, or ethnicity, and it's going to be different according to the good or service that's being purchased. And so that complicates this whole process to a considerable degree.
Right. And that's what, Croson is really the big case. It's really the big original. And they found all of those things. That the basis for their little base price was about 30% for construction. And they put forth as their evidence was just sort of these generalized notions for what Archer was saying. Like, well, we think that women were discriminated against, and that, and that's what the council said. And they had this sort of general statistics of how many contractors there were in that area. And of course, that's not good enough. You need to get specific evidence in the books. And that what Archer is talking about is that you have to actually have, or the best case scenario, the best evidence. We keep saying you have to have the best evidence for you to support a system is specifically getting statistics identifying that this group was discriminated against. And if you can get it even into the most narrow areas of delivery, that's even better. So that's what your compelling interest in your disparity study is going to do.
And this data is available. The Department of Labor has all sorts of by geographic area, and it's sort of in court cases, it's standard statistical regression analysis, but because of the different levels, because of what's done, given the size of the entity, it is expensive to hire consultants who will put together a study like this. You can go online, for example, at the City of Houston and access their studies. You see the length of the report, you see the degree of data that they look at.
And also part of the data, what has your entity done in the past? So it is a specific analysis of did you contribute to this overall lack of participation with your tax dollars? So there are many components of numbers that they're going to be looking at and running a statistical analysis on to show you a best case scenario. And these are components that all the different cases say that they look at, and Arturo sort of has gone through them, that you're going to have a statistician come in, and they're going to start with, okay, how do you break down your spend? And they will get with you and they will kind of discuss what are the areas and how are they going to study the areas, because as Arturo said, if you go to pipe people, they're different from the sidewalk people, or different from the t-shirt people. And then they're going to analyze your past spend. But the courts tell them, because they want it to be narrowly tailored, which is what we're about to, you have to do things like, okay, what are your racial classifications going to be? How do you define racial classifications? Some areas that would be very simple. You may have African Americans, Hispanics, white people, that's it. Cities like Houston, just to sit down and try and analyze how do you want, how far do you parse this? And you have interest groups in our community in particular that would want to say, well, I want to make a differentiation between the Indo-Asian community and the Southeast Asian. I mean, these are issues that your statistician is going to have to work out with you.
Right, and with the city of Houston, we had to settle the case because even if our data was good from the last study, it was several years old that the numbers wouldn't have matched up and we would have lost on that reason alone. So we had to do it, and when Judge Hughes was looking at it, the old city study had simply used the the census categories for minority, and the judge is looking at it and goes, do we really have a problem hiring Aleutians here in Houston, Texas, and how many are there? And of course, it should not have been a category absent some statistical support for it. So you get into, it's very geographic specific as to where you are.
And can you imagine the politics of this conversation? I mean, I'm glad I'm not that vendor, let's go that way, the statistician that has to come in and do this, but that is, and how y'all know, stats can be, attacked in different ways, and how you divide it and cut it and identify it can have a very significant impact. The other thing to note on here, what Arturo was saying, that they also are looking at qualified and available MWBs. That should play into the analysis.
I just wanted to clarify one
Yeah.
question. Does every district is required to have this type of?
That is a very good question. Can you piggyback off of another entity's disparity study if they're basically the same market area and the like?
Yeah.
What is
Well, I mean, to begin with, no Texas school district is required by law, in the absence of evidence, to have a contracting program that takes into account race or national origin. If there is a statistical disparity, it is possible that you could be required to adopt one if you're sued by a contractor, someone who has standing to sue and to do that. So it is something that if you're a district that doesn't have it, there's nothing to be concerned with initially. If people are complaining and there's some analysis and there may be some problem, then to avoid a lawsuit or to avoid in a lawsuit being hit with damages, then you may have to look at something. And I think what Sandy was referring to is, well, let's say I'm some sort of special district that's entirely within the city of Houston, and you would say, well, why can't I just piggyback on theirs? Well, you can to some degree, but the problem is, as Sandy was saying a moment ago, it depends on what your purchasing practices have been in the past. You may, for example, there may be a disparity with the city of Houston with regard to a particular racial or national origin group, and if you simply adopt that, if your data shows that there isn't a disparity, then that's a problem for you. So
all of these things we're outlining are all factors that when we go in and we write a brief for you, we argue a case for you, we're going to try and get the best evidence on each one of them. It doesn't mean you're going to have the best evidence on all of them. And if you're, let's say you're Fort Bend ISD and Fort Bend County just did a huge disparity study, could Fort Bend ISD point to it and say, we think we have similar, that could be some evidence. Is it the best evidence? No. And the question is going to be asked as well, but was Fort Bend ISD as racist as Fort Bend County? That's where you're gonna have a mix or a potential hole in your evidence. And this is where it gets to, it's the same thing, that it's got to be narrowly tailored. So whatever you adopt needs to reflect whatever you were doing bad in the past. So it gets harder to demonstrate if you're piggybacking on someone else's data that it's narrowly tailored for your past discriminatory activities.
yeah. The whole legal analysis with regard to this, under the 14th Amendment, it's the Equal Protection Clause. And depending on what the differences are, the courts have varying degrees of concern. When it comes to things like race, the court has said you need a compelling interest. And the compelling interest, and that has to be shown whenever race is used regardless of the purpose. So that factors in like Brown versus Board of Education or Hernandez versus State of Texas with regard to Mexican Americans. And many people would say it's not right that a particular group, because of the color of their skin or their national origin, is not getting the same benefits. But it also applies, for example, in a Michigan federal court, where the court struck down the placement of African American males in classrooms the way they had done it, because they said it is still a consideration of race, and you haven't shown what you need to do to show it. And so in a situation like that, where many people say that's a laudable reason, it's still the same analysis. So it's a compelling reason, and then it's narrowly tailored, so you fix the problem, but no more.
Right.
You want to get to the point that it's not being considered.
Exactly. We had a problem, but we're just gonna make a blanket, we want 50% to go to MWBs and nothing more. That will probably not pass this portion of the test. You want your program to be tailored to issues that your disparity study has identified. In fact, the law requires you to show proof that you consider alternatives or less restrictive means is what they're going to look at. Did you try something that's not so onerous or so specific? That is what, I have to click everything twice. So one of the things that the court also wants in terms of that, saying is it properly narrowed, is allowing for participation and requiring that you allow for good faith efforts. And good faith efforts causes a lot of questions, but it also is an arena that will provide you a lot of cover, so to speak, legally. That any vendor, regardless of their MWBE status, can satisfy your MWBE requirements. That's really what it means. How you go about achieving that could be a lot of different things. Lots of people do subcontracting. So you have to use expert or subcontractors. But you really need to have another option that even if they can't get the subcontractors, that they could prove to you that they tried to get the subcontractors. They're trying to get this participation. They are demonstrating good faith efforts to satisfy that. I'm going to point to my HIC friends because they have some of the best good faith effort documentation that exists. I tell everybody, call Alexis, look how much she loves that. Because the paperwork is great, and it really is thoughtful in ways that you can get outreach and participation that are not MWE certification or number specific, which is just a great thing in terms of your evidence on your actual program, but it's also a great thing if you don't want to adopt an official percentage program. You can still have good faith efforts that encourages people to go advertise in the Spanish language newspaper, for example, for their subcontractors, or to go attend an industry conference. Those are great things, and they're great things to think about when you're looking at what good faith efforts can be. So the alternative to having a race base is to have a race neutral program that addresses something else. And this is what Metro came out of after the litigation.
That's how Metro settled the lawsuit from the same contractor who sued the city of Houston. And the Port of Houston also adopted a similar program, and Houston Community College has such a program also.
And these are based on just small businesses. And it's exactly what it describes, that businesses of certain size and maybe economic size or number of employees, that they get an added weight or they fill in criteria in your proposals. The challenges with these are that a successful vendor graduates from the program. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. It's like, yeah, we've had this program to grow you, but then when you hit $10 million, you're no longer an SBE. So you might lose some of the contracts that you were getting. There's also the added issue of there are minority firms that don't qualify for it. You know, especially some of your professional services, architects and engineers come to mind in particular. You can have some small architect engineering firms that have gotten successful enough that it takes them right over the threshold and then it bumps, and so it leaves them kind of in this limbo of they still aren't going to get the biggest jobs, but they aren't getting any of the quality, you know, they aren't getting the additional considerations for the smaller jobs. So it's not a perfect system, but it is a system that will avoid a constitutional question. But the court is changing theirs, just so you know. The court's doing a disparity study right now. So they're actually moving away from the SPE. But the third and easiest, and the way that if you have a board that comes in tomorrow and says, we want to increase participation, and you're thinking, those crazy lawyers that have to do this whole study, and that's going to take a year, outreach, 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 outreach. Just go to your board and propose various ways of getting the word out there that you have projects. A lot of my clients do this. And a lot of time, in my experience, you tell me about my experience, that boards actually are really receptive to this because it is thoughtful, it is forward-looking, it puts you out in the community in a much broader way. And so there's a million different ways that you can do this. Mentorship programs, educational programs. You can have training, again, I'm going to look at Alexa, you can have training on how to get a bond. You know, a lot of small businesses have no idea how to get bonds or how to qualify for a bond. A lot of them do not know how to fill out y'all's procurement documents. Yeah, that's an issue.
Yeah, you learn what the problems are.
Yeah.
Is it bonding capacity? Is it access to financing? Is it knowledge about your procedures? You know, where do they go to find out public notices? Things like that, and then you can adopt a program that addresses the concerns you're hearing the most often.
Yeah, and I feel like we're Pied Pipers, but especially with NWBE, we're really encouraging people to let's not make another hurdle for everybody in terms of, if every one of y'all adopted an NWBE program and created completely different documentation, you realize that for the NWBE, you have just put an entire other form that they have to learn how to do and achieve in your procurement process.
Yeah.
Think about your process when you are adopting these
I
policies.
think the most successful programs have really spent a lot of time listening to what the business community is telling them and kind of really taking to heart. So for example, you could have one complaint that when talking to entities that people have heard is they say, we put a lot of effort into proposals. We spend a lot of time looking for this, and we may be selected on a panel, but we're never used. And so that causes a lot of frustration. And sometimes on the government end, you think, well, if they're on the panel, use is not our issue. We're the purchasing procurement people. But there needs to be a bigger look at that, because sometimes it will cause problems with the business community that will reach the ears of the superintendent and the board, and then they're looking for a fix.
So the last word is the food, just said look for food, but we're right on time. So the last part of all of this is that you can adopt all you want. If nobody really cares and nobody's really enforcing it or overseeing it, it's just another policy on your pieces of paper. So when you are talking about adopting a policy, no matter what it is, this needs to be part of your conversation. How are we going to enforce this? And you need to look at, are you going to have continual monitoring of their subcontractor spend, continual monitoring of their certification, verification, certifications lapse. Certifications you fall out of compliance. Are you going to check those things? And how are you going to work this into your contractual relationship with these people? Are you writing into your contracts? What's the default? What is the punishment for it? Don't just make a policy and then not have any kind of thought of who gets the wonderful extra job of implementing this policy. I'm sure it's someone in the finance and procurement department. So you got to think about that. It's not easy to monitor and enforce these things. What do you always say, Archer? Like if the top person isn't bought in, like nothing.
Yeah, that's
not gonna happen.
My experience has been, it has to be bought in by the leadership, the administration at the top. Otherwise, it's not going to be important. And it's not going to happen, and there's going to be frustration. So these are all things to consider in adopting a program at really any level we can talk about.
So with this last slide are just some, just general thoughts for y'all to go back and think about if you're interested in programs like this, or if you have higher-ups that are interested in programs like this. These are some of the sort of basic considerations as you are driving home and thinking, well, how can we do something like that? And with that is it. If y'all have any questions, we are happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Crystal
Appreciate it.
clear? Thank y'all.
All right, the food is here, so you can go ahead and take a break and get our food here to the right, and we'll be back with our last presentation.
Don't even know.
Just keep on eating and we'll just finish out. This is not going to take very long, maybe 5 minutes, like that. 2 slides, 3 slides. It's an update on Senate Bill 943 that started on January the 1st, 2020. And all I did is a presentation. I put a bill in a PowerPoint format. So they added subchapter J, some additional provisions to the Public Funds Investment Act, Communications or Information related to contracted information. It basically looks at that any governmental body that executes a contract that has a stated expenditure of at least $1 million in public funds or results in the expenditure of at least $1 million, you have to include it in your contract, in your RFP, in your vendor packet, so they can have available the contracting information that is required in this section. For us, our attorney has prepared and updated the RFP template and also the vendor packet so that we can implement it January 1st. I'm going to try to bring her next month here also. She has other updates in purchasing that she will come to talk to you about, and so she will cover this more at length in her session. This is just basically so that you have the information available in case you need to make quick changes between now and the next month in your RFPs or your vendor packet, and know that what some matters that has come about in the changes to the law and the information that we have already available. It is, if you get a written request for information on your contract, so you basically, that you have to include it in your contract so that you can ask your contractor for the information, and you have so many days to ask them for that or send it to the Attorney General. You have 3 days from the time that you receive the written request to send it in writing. And also, you can also have 13 business days to request an Attorney General decision regarding the request. So I would provide a copy of this to your procurement individuals to make sure that they're aware that they need to include language in their contracts, in their bids, so that when you get a request, that you need to ask them to have that available to you in order to comply with the open records request. For the most part, the contractor has to make sure that they abide by this section. And later on, we're going to talk about what if they don't abide by it. Can you terminate the contract? And according to the section, yes, you can. But you have to do a few steps before you do that, if they don't meet the section. In general, if you submit it to the Attorney General no later than the 18 days, to receive the written request, or if it doesn't comply with the requirements in a good faith effort to obtain the information from the contracting entity. So this is all, the way this bill is written, you go back and look at this section, look at what it applies to, and then you go back again to this section. So it's, you have to take it, this subchapter within the entire chapter that deals with open records. If you're unable to meet the deadline to provide the information no later than 13 days that you receive the written request of information, and it has to, under section 552, that you have to have a contracted entity to preserve the contracted information, must provide the government or any contract information related to the contract in the custody of their possession, and provide it at no cost to the governmental body. So hopefully they'll say, well, you know, there's no cost for me to provide this to you, although I know that there is a cost always associated with providing information. And they must preserve the contract information related to the contract in a record, according to the records retention requirements applicable to the governmental body. This is huge because you got to tell the vendor, okay, so if this deals with procurement or deals with a particular area, you have to keep it for 5, 7 years. They have to maintain that information for that period of time, according to your schedule that we are required to retain the records. The requirements of this subchapter may apply when the contractor or vendor agrees to the contract and be terminated if the contract or vendor knowingly or intentionally fails to comply with the requirement of that chapter. So you can, you know, they decide, well, we're not going to adhere to that requirement, so we're not going to provide that information. They refuse to do that. Well, you can look at terminating the contract, and there's a section that talks about that coming up in a couple of slides. You may not accept a bid or contract for an entity that has determined that the vendor has knowingly or intentionally failed to comply. So if you know that somebody is not going to provide that information, then you may not accept that contract, formally award the contract by your entity. So if you have non-compliance with this provision, you're going to provide notice, and it has to be in writing, and you have to state whether the requirement of this subchapter that the entity has violated. In other words, looking at what area did they fail to comply. So provide them a notice, a letter saying, here, you failed to comply this, if you didn't do it within the number of days that were required to do that. Advise the entity that the governmental body may terminate the contract if it does not cure the violation before the 10th business day. So the entity can decide, you know what, we're not, 10 days has gone by, you haven't addressed it, so now we're gonna terminate. You can terminate the contract, provide notice, does not cure the violation, you fail to comply, has not taken any adequate steps to ensure future compliance. If you have a vendor that's just like, well, I'm not going to comply with it, and you kind of know your vendors, you know, which one has the capability of complying and who doesn't. Adequate steps for future compliance, and they don't do it within a 10 business day, or they don't have a records retention program where they say, you know, we're going to keep our records on time. Here's what you can terminate the contract for. This was taken into effect on January the 1st, 2020. So the only exception to that is you cannot terminate a contract that involves a public security, meaning an investment, something in the area of investment, then you're not able to do that for payment of proceeds for any debt service or loan or public security. So I would provide this a copy of this bill or this section that has been added. It's just more information for the procurement office. So I would look at what language you want to insert in your RFPs. If you want specific language or you want to copy some of our language for an RFP or a vendor, we'll be happy to send it to you. In fact, I probably included in the email that I sent you guys so that you maybe work with your procurement office so that make sure that your contracts, your RFPs, your vendor packet includes this language, because what if it gets to $1 million? Some of the smaller districts or medium-sized districts, even those we may not get not too many $1 million contracts. But if you are a larger district that has multi-million-dollar contracts, you want to include it in your contract. I do remember we have some contracts with HCDE, and I venture that you guys are going to add this section in your new templates to add that we need to maintain a retention schedule for all our files and the contracting information and so on, which we do already. It's just not in the contract, so to speak, right now. So we still have some food out there, so if you do not, please have a little bit more, because I don't want to eat all those potatoes. I'll be loaded all day today, so. February 14th is our next time that we will have. I already have, see who else do I have? I have Sarah from our attorney coming in for more procurement updates. We'll probably have something on the census. The census is going to start here on 2020 census. And so we'll send out the invitations or the notice for our February 14th meeting. Now, I know in March we sometimes have a meeting, sometimes we do not. TASC was here in Houston this year, so it'll be the first week in March, am I correct? So we'll probably have a meeting maybe to the latter part of March, and so I'll send out some notices so that we don't, conflict with any of those sections. So that's all I have. I want to mention in the back of your agenda, there is a QR code. If you have a smartphone or a iPad, if you just click on it, it'll show up a survey, you fill it out, you type in your name and the type of certificate that you want, or you want both of them, the TASCO and the CPA. And then the one thing that I want to make sure that you guys do when you go to the very end, you click submit. If you don't click submit, it will not send it to you. Because you finish it out, and if you leave it open like that, it's not going to go anywhere. So make sure you click submit, and then you're going to get it at the email that you indicated in the survey. Okay. Most of the time, once you have your name in there, it'll populate by itself whatever email you've used in the past. So when you get to your office, you can just print the certificates, and you'll have what's available for your license. Okay, that's all I have for you. Any questions or any thoughts? So let me take this opportunity.